Right, and we're back for another episode of Creative Retrospective. And my guest for this one is Ray Sang. She's a marketer and manager, so she manages a few people, which we'll get into later on in the interview. One of them being Anne Marie, which is a DJ. I think he used to manage another person, but I think she's out there in Jenna Colo, who does a lot of like the mental health stuff and things of that nature. So where I want to start off with you, Ray. So I'm going to take you back all the way to kind of like undergrad studies. And you did an interview, kind of talking about your journey, right? And you said you didn't do journalism when kind of being at uni. I think the only part you had was like media law at uni and stuff like that. And that quite surprised me kind of looking for your work. But it does seem like you kind of take the journalism ethics very seriously in your work, right? So kind of going back, what was it that kind of excited you about journalism during your studies and why carry on moving on to IndustryMe in 2017?
You know what? It's so strange because I think when I was in uni, it was kind of at the time of the blog era. So kind of everybody was, popping up with their own like beauty and fashion blog. And for me, that just was never my thing. But music was always a consistent thing that I was passionate about. And kind of there were music blogs around at the time, but just kind of nothing in the spaces of music that I kind of enjoyed. So I grew up in the kind of era of like SBTV. So like, everything very much seemed very rap focused. And like I loved like rap and grime and all of that kind of music. But in terms of what I feel would feel passionate to write about, that was pop and R&B music. And being a black woman who likes pop music, nobody had a like, and if they had, it wasn't a popular mainstream thing. And that's not to discredit anyone who was doing that at the time, but in terms of seeing myself in it, it just wasn't a thing that was happening. So I kind of thought, well, if it doesn't exist, I'll build it myself. And that's kind of where really my love for, I guess, blogging and the whole concept of industry me even came from.
Yeah. And like, as you said, you built Industry Me in 2017. I know, not even that. Before Industry Me, you had a WordPress, right, where you kind of dropped your kind of ideas and things of that nature. So you would go into Industry Me in 2017. What was, I guess, you say you're kind of seeing things that you're not seeing like in your own space. But I guess for me, what was the reason why you kind of focused so much on, I guess, I won't call him the little man because I'm not trying to diss them, but just the smaller artists, right? I think a lot of people, when they want to get into music, they're like, right, I have a wish list of like, I don't know, Skepta, Stormzy, either, but your focus was mainly on the people who are maybe kind of just starting out. They have their stories just beginning. Why was the focus on those people so much so?
For me, it's because the stories are not any less valid just because the person doesn't have a million followers on Instagram. Like anyone who kind of knows anything about music will tell you that a lot of the talent is the underground talent. It's not the people with like thousands and thousands of followers with all the marketing spend behind them. It's the people that you meet at the open mic nights or even in church. Like I'm not trying to be funny, but some of the best singers I've ever met, they don't even have Instagram. They're singing in church. Like let's be for
Yeah.
real. So
Mhm.
that's kind of where it really came from for me. Like I thought, well, these people have stories and they're not getting told for something really silly, like for something so simple as there's no label behind them or there's no marketing spend behind them or they don't have a certain amount of followers. And I was just kind of like, well, that doesn't make any sense. So it's a problem. I can do something to change it. So why wouldn't I?
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that's something that I kind of relate to as well. So when I was doing the Bound Effect like some years ago, right? I think what was kind of really frustrating to deal with was so many people kind of appreciate the work you do. Like, okay, like, you're putting the work out there, you're kind of like champion music. But then when it came to artists that they've never heard of, their friends never heard of, they wouldn't even give it a second thought, right? They'll just kind of be like, oh, that's someone they're posting, right? Until that person became someone. And then they're like, oh my gosh, you never guess who I just heard. Like it'll be like Jazz Caris or something. They're like, what? I just posted that like 2 years ago, mate. Like, what's going on? Like, I feel like there's sometimes is that lack of like, oh, this is a household name, or this is like a name around the streets. That for some reason kind of makes it harder for people to kind of engage with your content. What did you kind of do, or if anything, to kind of bridge that gap between this person's never heard of this artist. How can I kind of entertain them to kind of be invested in this artist?
What I've kind of recognized is that people only tend to support the things that they're familiar with. So what I then tried to do was, okay, well, then let's keep talking about this person so you do become familiar with them, so that when you come across their music on your own, you'll be like, well, I've seen that 5 times because Ray keeps posting about it. So it's kind of like you're more like, and it's a really like subconscious, almost like the thing that happens within the mental that people don't even realize is happening. You kind of always, I guess, have an affinity to something that you recognize. So it's in seeing it multiple times that that recognition develops, and then you kind of then go and engage on your own. So like I as much as I love that people were discovering people through the platform, that I don't really think that was ever the point of it. I think for me it was about kind of having a place to put someone out there multiple times, because you'll notice that the people that we supported from the beginning, we just continued supporting them. It was never like a one-off type situation. So as a result of doing that, people kind of got used to seeing certain people. And then when they were to pop up on the timeline by themselves, like independent of us, people would be more likely to engage with them. And that's kind of what I was aiming to do.
That's fair. And to be honest, I think it paid off. Like I think in that same year that you started IndustryMe, you got kind of you got an award by a blog. I think it was she's in a pod, something like that, like in 2017. Like, did you feel like you were starting to get that recognition like quite early on?
You know what's weird? I have a very like interesting relationship with that word recognition, because it
Okay.
never really felt like it was coming from within the UK. So I
Right.
felt like the
Yes.
majority of our
Yes.
engagement,
Mhm.
especially in the early days, I think towards the sort of like period before I stepped away, like I was starting to get it from the UK. But I feel like for the, I'd say probably first 2 to 3 years, the US was our biggest market, like both in terms of like clicks to the site, but also in terms of the artists that would engage. I felt like in terms of a lot of the bigger artists, it was a lot easier to get their teams to engage with us than it was to like speak to people here when we were trying to like then go on to talk to bigger artists. Like it was a lot of grief, I'm not gonna lie, from the UK. Whereas like the Americans like, yeah, come over. Like they're like super, super open. So I do feel like we were starting to get recognition after a certain point, but I do believe that the majority of that recognition was driven by the US market, if I'm being entirely honest.
That's touching that more. Why do you think that is? Because this is something that I've harped on like countless times. I think I even had like an episode where it's kind of like, even I think this is even extends as far as artists, right? You see so many artists in the UK doing their thing for so many years. And it's only until maybe like one kind of rogue American podcast shouts to right, everyone's like, oh my gosh, Little Sims, she's fantastic. Like, wait, she's been here the whole time. But yeah, why do you think that phenomenon exists? I think this is something that a couple of people are starting to kind of catch from.
I think I like to think, well, not like to think of it, but I often describe UK as like the household with the bad Wi-Fi. So it's kind of like
Okay.
everyone is like super, super fast and it's going, but like there's going to be some buffering along the way. So like, like when you're watching a match and like you might be watching the football match upstairs and like people in your house watching it downstairs. So you see that they've scored the goal for like 5 seconds before the people
Right.
downstairs
Yeah,
realize what's
yeah,
happening. That's often what it feels like being within the UK. Like it's not that they don't see it, but it's like for some reason there's always a delay to react. And I don't know whether it's because as a place like geographically we're smaller, so maybe the budgets here are smaller. I don't know if that's what it is. So because there's a smaller budget, people are a lot more stringent, and like there's a lot more criteria that you need to hit before people are willing to spend their money and like engage. I don't know whether that's what it is, but it often feels like, I don't know, we're in some kind of matrix and there's some time delay in the UK. That's honestly what it feels like, because it's not that they don't see it, it's just that they take a bit longer to start moving their feet. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And I can agree with that, especially even because I think one of the common conversations that comes up, right, is like DJing, right? It's like, oh, why don't DJs kind of play these new music? It's like, well, if they did, would you receive it, right? And this is the issue that we kind of face. I think in my theory, I think my theory, I think it's just different culture. I feel if even in general life, I feel like Americans are quite more open to, for example, meeting new people, embracing new things. I think UK people were more conservative than we like to be. I don't mean politically, I just mean like socially, in terms of like when we kind of like something, we become the creatures of habit, right? Like we don't want to kind of test out something new, but like, oh boy, if I don't like it, there's actually even in going out, right? Like in terms of like events, people are like, oh, I don't want to go to this random bar anymore because it might not be a good night. I need to go to like a particular event because it's maybe like guaranteed to be decent or something like that. I think it's more. I think there's definitely a cultural aspect to that for sure. Um.
Yeah,
So yeah,
there definitely
yeah,
is a cultural aspect to yeah.
yeah. So I think one thing I want to kind of pick your brain on is, again, because you did this independently, right? I think one of the hardest kind of bridges to gap, especially when you're trying to be someone who kind of secures interviews, talk to these artists, is actually securing the interview itself, right? Because you don't have that same name as like an NME, which would they go on to work with, or like a Complex UK. So when you're kind of starting out and connecting these artists to get these interviews, I guess for the people at home, you can share your secrets. If not, well, else are up to you. But what was kind of your way of kind of like um I guess yeah, securing these kind of the interviews and making these connections with these artists, not knowing you don't have that background name to you.
Okay, this is a very interesting one. I think the reason that it worked for me in the beginning is because I was a genuine fan of music in the first place. So I like a lot of artists that I wanted to speak to initially, like we followed each other on Twitter or like we had some kind of engagement prior to. So what I did when I actually was first starting out, I kind of looked through everyone who was following me on Twitter and kind of looked at whose DMs would probably be like open. And then I literally just DM'd every artist that I'd had some kind of engagement with prior to. And the ones that said yes, ironically, but not ironically, were the Americans. So those were my first interviews.
Okay.
So that's kind of what happened. And then eventually, I started to engage with a particular niche. So that's kind of when I branched into sort of like the UK R&B type scene. Um, and then people kind of saw me writing about their work. And I was very intentional about not just doing this copy paste of the press release, because that's something that kind of annoyed me in the beginning when I first kind of got into the whole journalism space. I kind of felt like reviews weren't genuine reviews anymore. You would still have like NME and Rolling Stone and those kind of like major publications doing like, and Pitchfork doing like the major reviews. But I felt like a lot of the independents had literally just started copying and pasting the press releases and like with a little word tweak here and there. And I'm like, that's not a review. You just kind of told me that this project exists. That's cool. But what do you actually think about it? So I think because I was doing that differently, when I was actually putting it out there and I was tagging these people and like the work I was doing, and they would actually go back and read it themselves. They're like, oh, this is different. This is not what people usually do when it comes to my music. This person has taken time out to like really give their thoughts. So then when I was then going to follow up and like, ask for an interview, they'd be like, oh yeah, why not? Because you seem to genuinely care. Like this is not a tick box exercise for you. This is something that you generally are trying to engage with, and I will now engage with you in turn. So yeah.
Yeah. Um, one bit again, and one thing I want to move on to is kind of so outside of the interviews that you did have your 4 articles, and I think this is something that and again I've interviewed quite a lot of people who like are in the music space and they've done their writing and stuff like that, but I've never seen so many articles that seem to genuinely want to kind of help I guess, the other people who are within that space. Like you had tips for content creators, you hosted She's Creates, I think in 2018 or something like that. So
Yeah.
why was this desire to kind of again like this is quite surprising because most people, especially when they get into the writing space, I've seen it myself, like they get a bit notes writing, it's like, right, I'm the person in the room now, and you got to go figure out the same way I figured it out. But it seems to be like a genuine desire to go, okay, no, like this is what I've learned, let me share it across. Why that desire?
Because I've never had the whole like crabs in a bucket mentality. Like I never thought that me suddenly doing well means that like, I am the only person that can do well. And if I share this information, that means less jobs for me. Like, especially within the space that I was in, the more of us that are there, the easier it is to spread the message and like, kind of make the cultural shift that we're trying to, for me, it was about getting as many people in the space as possible so that like when it comes down to decision making that like we are there. Because like a lot of the times it feels like when you're the only person in the room, you may have a really, really cool idea, but if people just don't get it, like you can talk about it as much as you want, it'll just get glazed over. Whereas if there's more of you in the room who share similar sort of opinion, when the discussion then comes forward, it's more likely that you will have an opportunity to take the floor and actually share this opinion, and people will actually take notice of it because it's not just you. So I think that's always been the way I've seen it. Like there is strength in numbers, so let's get as many of us in the room.
Yeah, it's fair. And then you started to build a writing team when you were at IndustryMe. So I want you to talk
I
more about
did,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk more about it. I know there's a couple people you did. I think again it was mainly women led, of course. But I think there was one guy. I think his name was Hadley or something. He's a bit of a tweeter here and there. Like, what was your process in terms of hiring this team and building this team? I feel like you wanted it to be like a full, like serious kind of like writing kind of publishing company.
Yeah, so I'll be incredibly transparent about this. I think when the influx of kind of like requests to come to events and do things started coming in, because I was originally in Brighton when I first started. So I started this in uni. I
Right.
went to Sussex.
Okay.
I was in Brighton. A lot of these events were in London, and I was studying a law degree. So there's only so much time that I have on my hands to be traveling back and forth between Brighton and London. So initially, bringing other people on just kind of started as a necessity. Like, hey, I can't be at this event. I trust the way that you write because I've seen your writing before. Would you want to go and rep the brand at this event? And then it kind of just built from there. And I think because people could see that there was a genuine like influx of things happening, a lot of people wanted to be involved anyway. So I didn't think I really struggled with kind of getting people to come in and be on the team. So that was really, really cool. And then I think I'm kind of skipping ahead a little bit, but
Yeah, no worries.
when I guess things got crazy busy and we started running our own events, I realized that I couldn't act in an editor position the way I once did. So I realized I actually needed to bring in an actual editor. And when I did that, it felt like, oh, I had so much more time to like build out the event side of things. So I think hires really came as a result of the necessity of the growth that was happening. And I guess it happened in such an organic way because people understood the vision. People had realized that, oh, there's not many like platforms that are doing this specific thing and like quote unquote like trying to uplift a smaller artist or people who are earlier in the journey. Like I actually believe in what you're trying to do. So because I believe in the vision, of course I want to be along for the ride. So yeah.
Okay, makes sense. I want to kind of dig into a couple articles you wrote during this time because I feel like some of them have kind of
Oh.
paid dividends along the way. Nothing too crazy. I think the first one was
Oh.
about Drake becoming the culture vulture or something like that. And it seemed like you were quite nervous to put this one out to begin with. But I feel like, looking back now, I think a lot of people will kind of be on your side. So yeah, talk to us more. So again, people who don't know, I think the title is literally called "Is Drake Becoming the Jamie Oliver of the Music World?" So when you and then again kind of talks about Drake kind of appropriate, I think this is when the Bad Bunny song drops and he's speaking in Spanish and stuff like that. Again, so what was I guess what was your hesitations about putting this article out?
At the time, I think probably Drake was probably one of the most popular artists in the world at that point.
Mm,
And I feel like I think I've always had a knack for seeing things early. Like I can often tell when something is going to go in a particular direction, like usually years before people realize that's what's going to happen. And I think that's a benefit in terms of planning, but it's also not a hindrance, but it can kind of be a tricky path to walk, especially when people don't see it. And I feel like we worked so hard to build IndustryMe into this place that was like super positive and like, an uplifting community. To say something controversial wasn't really in our wheelhouse at that point. So
exactly.
it
Yeah.
was kind of like, oh, is this going to rub people up the wrong way? Like people don't really know us for like talking about controversial things. Unless we're talking about a race debate, because yeah, I'll get controversial every single time about that. But like outside of that, like genuinely, we weren't really a place where controversial opinions were expressed. And I think we'd really been heavily in like the review side of things. But I think that was probably the first time, or at least the most prominent time I can remember in the earlier portion of our growth, where we were like, okay, this is a really opinionated like opinion piece that people might not connect with, but I think it's something that needs to be said. And I liked the fact that I didn't have like a straight, this is my opinion, just suck it up and listen. It was like, no, let's have a conversation about this.
Right.
Because I'd obviously had my own thoughts about what was going on. I thought that the title was kind of a bit inflammatory, so you can
Yeah.
kind of see where I was coming from with that.
Mhm.
So like I had my own opinions, but I didn't think my opinion should be the only opinion, and I wanted to have a conversation about it. So that's really what it was about.
Fair. And I think that leads me on to another thing that you've talked about quite often in terms of like opinions and sharing different opinions. Because I think one of the things, and it's been the same year, you said something about the UK scene needed to have a reset, and to be honest, I kind of agreed at the time. I think what is interesting about the UK, more so than American kind of scene, is the fact that only one opinion can exist. I think, and again, I've always had my theories for this, right, in terms of whether it's proximity or stuff like that. But when it comes to criticizing UK art, it seems to be taken way more harshly than any other kind of genre out there, especially UK rap in that particular sense. UK R&B has this thing and they get sour too, but UK rappers in any sort of subgenre feels like it's almost impossible to kind of like attack them without being like, and then you even have people kind of even justifying any sort of retaliation from someone just giving their opinion about vibrations. It's kind of crazy. It's good to kind of get your thoughts on this.
I think there's two sort of elements to that because I feel like we live in an incredibly clickbaity time. So sometimes people be critiquing something, but they'll say it in a purposefully inflammatory way for views. So there's that element of things which I don't particularly like, and I understand why artists would have issues with that because I think nobody's above critique, but there's a way to say things for sure. So I think like there's an element of that. I also think proximity, as you mentioned, is an issue. Like there's always this kind of fear of if I say something that somebody doesn't like, I'm gonna run into them at like a party somewhere, and now it's gonna be on site because I had an opinion that they didn't like. So there's kind of that element as well. But I think critique is necessary for growth. So I think it definitely has a place. The issue that a lot of people have is because for a lot of artists, I guess not so much now, but I guess at the time, a lot of people were the first to do things. So if it's like you're the first and you're getting all of this heavy critique, there may not be an opportunity for someone else to come and do it again. And I think that's probably more so an issue, I guess, in the film world and the music world. But I guess there is an element of that in the music world as well. So I feel like that's the fear that often like accompanies critique. A lot of people feel like if this isn't received like 100% like positively, I will never get the opportunity to do this again. Maybe I will, but someone coming after me might not get the green light to do this. I think that's where the nervousness around critique comes from. But I do think it has its place. It absolutely has its place. You can't grow unless you improve. So
True, that's true. And so moving to 2019, this is where I feel like in terms of the American thing that you mentioned before, you're starting to kind of generally gain some serious prominence. This is when you interviewed DDG, which obviously everyone knows now as, oh, it's that Paddy Bailey's baby daddy. But you interviewed them when like people known just for the artistry. What like was this a moment where you felt like, okay, I've made it. Like this is what I'm gonna do now. This is it. So it's on its legs. Like, you know, maybe I could do law later, but this is where I am right now.
you know what was so crazy about that? Like that came about, like they came to us for that, which was
Oh,
that's the
okay.
point that I was kind of mind blown. Like I didn't pitch for that. So like when that happened, I was like, oh, like, and he's always been quite a big personality. Like even outside of the music, he had a massive YouTube channel, loads of followers. Like and his followers are super engaged people as well. So I was like very surprised that the team even knew who we were. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
So like I was just like, oh, okay, this is because you have to understand, like it's not that I didn't think we were doing bits because I did, but it's like America's a massive market. Like for them to kind of know a really niche publication that at the time was majority focused on uplifting upcoming artists, and then you're coming to me as somebody who's got millions of followers, has been quite established in the YouTube space, and you're coming to me because you're like, yeah, his project is like really, really R&B led, and we think that you're a great publication to interview him. I was very shocked, but I kind of thought, okay, yeah, yeah, we are doing stuff. Okay, let's go. Like that's kind of how I felt about it. And I think the most interesting part of that experience was like walking into the label to interview him that day. And I'm kind of seeing like all of these publications with their super fancy cameras, and I'm like, oh damn, like we have really hit the big leagues. Like
Yeah.
this is like,
Yeah.
like there's a moment like you almost like pause, when you're watching a sitcom and they're like, you're probably wondering how I got here. Like
Yeah.
that's literally the moment that I was having at the time. It was just like it was so crazy, but it was such a proud moment because I was like, yeah, I have earned this. Like, yeah, we do deserve to be here. They wanted us. They see the value in us, and I think that more so was the most important thing. Like people were starting to see the value of what we were doing, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy that he kind of found. Did he ever kind of express how they found you, or was it just, oh, we just found you? Like, did they ever kind of share that with you?
Do you know what? Like you know, I have to say it, like, sometimes God is giving you a blessing, stop asking questions. Like, you know what? Like, that's like,
Fair,
I didn't
fair.
ask how, I didn't want to know. I said, okay, this is clearly the path you want me to walk down. Thank you, Jesus. Let's go. Like,
Mhm.
that's honestly where I was at with that at that point. I honestly didn't ask. I was just kind of, I was so excited to just kind of walk that path. I genuinely did not ask.
That's fair. And again, this will kind of be like the string of many kind of high profile gigs you'll get along the way. But before that, as every creator does, I don't know what it is, there's something in the air, but we all have to do it. We have to start a podcast, right? So this is when, right? So the year after, just for COVID, right? It's just in us. Like, so you start Rhymeshe, and this what I found to be a fun fact, I didn't know this at the time when I was researching. Mimi was one of the original kind of co-hosts of Rhymeshe. So it was Mimi, yourself, and
Yeah.
Tiana A. Marie. I did not know that. So again, so how did you kind of recruit the troops for this podcast? How did that come about?
Okay, so this is another like beautiful moment that kind of started because I was involved with IndustryMe. So, um, at the time, the girl who was actually one of the producers of the podcast, was like working for a writer. So she came to me, she said, I have
Yeah. And was that Hood Elegance babe, right? I can't remember her name now. It's the Irish
so
one,
her
right?
name's Afoma.
Foma, that's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes, yes,
yeah,
yes, yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, so yeah, her. And she was kind of she's a really dope writer, and so we were already working together. She came to me, she said, I have this really, really like dope idea that I kind of want with like women in music, and I think it's gonna be really, really like a really great thing, and I really want you to be a part of it. And at the time, I looked at her like, listen, I don't do on screen. I'm not about that life. Please, like, I mean, if you find other people, then sure. I mean, like, I guess it wouldn't hurt. But honestly, I had no plans to do anything on screen at the time. I was very comfortable being a behind the scenes babe that just like in front of camera was not my ministry, basically, is what
Right.
I'm trying to tell you. So
Mhm.
I was like, okay, I really like the idea. And because it's you and I've worked with you for a long time and I kind of trust you, all right, cool. Like, not really trying to be in front of the camera, but I believe in what you're trying to do here. So let's see what happens. And I think it just honestly it just took on a life of its own. Like it was honestly probably one of the best experiences I've had in the industry, honestly. I really enjoyed being on the
Wait,
podcast.
why would you say that? That's quite a big statement because you've done like I'll probably say in the hundreds of interviews and articles. Why is this the best one? Why is this the best experience?
Because the transformation that came from it was so unexpected for me. And I didn't actually realize it until I guess probably after it ended and I was reflecting on it. Like I'd always had an opinion about things, but as you mentioned, like it's not always easy to critique things or always easy to voice those opinions. And I feel like I became a lot more confident as as a part of going through that process. So I think for me, it definitely changed me for the better. Like I definitely grew in confidence as a result of that. And I think everything that happened during that experience kind of led me to kind of where I am now. So I like regardless of the fact that it's ended now, I would always be grateful for that experience.
Would you say that's part of the reason which sparked the YouTube channel of Industry Me? Because that started the same year, right? Towards the back end of or towards the middle of that year.
I do think so. I think like I think the industry was definitely changing. So I feel like people were moving away from the written form or just not engaging with it in the same way. So there was that element of that as well. But I also saw the value of like having, I guess, video conversations and like having a visual representation of the conversations that you were having. I definitely saw the value in that. So I think it was kind of a two-pronged thing.
Yeah, that's fair. And when it comes to kind of journalism and kind of writing and all that stuff, I think one of the things that you expressed at the time was a lot of people aren't really interested in like artistry, they're interested in hype, right? In terms of if you have clout and people will only cover these things when people have clout. Do you still think that's the case today in 2024?
Oh, now you're asking me real questions. Um, I do to an extent. I think it's definitely improved because I think because we've kind of come to the point where we're starting to see the effects of only focusing on hype, I think people are definitely trying to pivot and do something else because people are realizing that that's not actually a sustainable way to do things. So I do think like we've almost come full circle. Like, yes, there's always going to be like the clickbaity type situations.
Of course, yeah.
And I think we are in a bit of an attention economy. So I feel like there's always going to be like people who edit things a certain way just to get attention. I think that's
Yeah.
always going to be a thing. But I think people are definitely now more focused on having conversations of substance and focusing on the artistry once again. Because I feel like people are realizing that after a while, like just focusing on hype becomes quite lazy. And then I think people are also realizing if that's the people that you're platforming, the scene in and of itself, regardless of what genre you're in, it doesn't grow.
It
And there's no
trivializes it to in a
progression.
sense, right?
Say that again,
It
sorry.
trivializes it to a degree, right?
Yeah, I think it does. And I feel like it kind of like disregards all the hard work that goes into making music or any art form for that regard. So I think people kind of recognize, oh, if we keep putting these people at the forefront, when people are like coming to the genre, they're gonna think that's the creme de la creme of the genre. When really, no, it's not. Like we're about way more than that. And I think, especially when it comes to things like looking for investment or like trying to progress things like in a commercial way, you can't have the hype man as the representation of whatever it is you're trying to build because people will see through that pretty quickly, and I don't think there's any progression that comes from doing so. So I think people are starting to wake up to that for sure. So yes, in short, I think there's still an element of focus on like attention because it kind of has to be. There's so much noise right now, but I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that substance is actually the way forward.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think you made a point again some years back where you're saying something like if someone's like a meme artist, or whatever you want to call it, right? They can't last several years in whatever industry they're in, right? So if you're looking at industry over extended period of time, the people who do last a long time are the people who are taking it seriously, right? So if you do focus on those people who are, and it's quite weird. I feel like we're in a very weird position right now where you have artists openly coming out saying they don't care about the genre itself, or they're not as passionate. Whereas before, it used to be like people were saying, like, yeah, this is my whole life. And now some people are saying, like, oh, like it's a job, it is what it is. And I don't know, even though let's say people are saying that's healthy for mental health and it's not your whole life, but I don't think that does well for the scene as a whole. If people are just saying, oh, this is just something I can kind of like pick up and throw away. You do want your forerunners, you do want the best people in your genre to be the people who are like, no, this is what I'm doing, and I'm gonna kind of stand behind it for as long as I possibly can. So yeah, I agree with that.
I
Um,
think the
so
I
go
think
ahead.
the ironic thing about that, right, is that people think we don't already realize that. I think you as a listener can definitely tell the people who are genuinely passionate about something and someone who's just doing it for a paycheck. Like I definitely can tell when the difference between those two people. So I think that's often something that people like don't, I guess, acknowledge often. And I also think sometimes people don't also recognize that there's artists who do that, but they have a backlog of music that wasn't like that. So I feel like
Yes.
in a way, like they're almost afforded the privilege of being able to do that because that's not every song they've ever made. They've got like years of backlog and catalog where you can see that actually no, that wasn't always the case, and that they may feel like that now because I can imagine if you do something for 10 years that and it can become a bit strenuous or stressful. It's not going to be fun all the time. Like you can love your day job, you're not going to love it every single day. There's going to be some times where it's a bit of a tug of war there. So I think there's also an element of that as well. Like people are allowed to say um the music right now it's just me, I'm just going with the flow, seeing what happens, like whatever. Like people are allowed to have that, especially when they put in the work. It's when you come into the game saying things like that I'm kind of like, okay, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there's some sort of kind of like you got to earn your stripes, and this is any industry, right? Like, for example, if I'm at work, right, and I just started a job, and I'm coming in like once a week, and maybe I'm even afforded to, but it's like, wait, but you just started, like, you can't compare yourself to like your boss or your head of department who's coming in like once, twice a week because he's been there, he's kind of been here for the past 5 years. Everyone knows that he's kind of garnered that respect. You need to kind of do the same thing in that sense. I think I'm not as optimistic as you in terms of the listeners catching on because I feel like one way you kind of pick up on this very quickly is listening to more artists. And I think especially when you kind of get to your late 20s and so on and so forth, a lot of people just don't. So I even see it in terms of the things people pay for, which is quite shocking. Like people pay for certain concerts and the show is bad, but it's their favorite artist. And they don't think they've ever made that connection of, wait, I'm paying for a performance. I'm not just paying for a sing along. Like I'm here to see this person kind of bring this music to life. And I still think we're in that period where people are going to say they're there in terms of concerts, right? And people are listening to say to have that conversation. So I don't know if I'm as optimistic as you on that. I think we still got a lot of work to do in terms of, okay, what am I actually trying to kind of get? In that sense.
I do agree that a lot of activities are driven by FOMO. I do think there's an element of that, but I think with things like concerts, there's always going to be an element of that, though. I don't think there's a way to really
Yeah, of
circumvent that.
course. Yeah.
What I do think though is that like there is those kind of things do present an opportunity for people who are genuine to then connect with said artists. So then it's then down to said artists to put on a performance that people will engage with. But I do also think a performance is always an opportunity to engage with a new crowd. So even if you're not the headline artist, because you have to remember, even when you go to these shows, there's always like an opener.
Yeah.
Most people, when they go to the show, they're not going for the opener. So I feel like there's an onus also on the artist to treat every like performance that you do as an opportunity to win people over. Because yeah, they're going to be fans of you in that audience, but someone could just be there because their friend bought a ticket and like they wanted to tag along and go out with their friend that day. That person's never heard of you before, so that now is your opportunity to turn that person into a fan. So I feel like there needs to be a bit more hunger and urgency from artists themselves to kind of use an opportunity where people may have been attending because of FOMO to then turn that person into a fan, because I guarantee you put on a good show and that person will never forget that show.
Agreed, and I've definitely been in that position a few times, so I could definitely agree with that statement. I think this leads on to my next question, because again, I feel like we've talked a lot about like how maybe the people who are covering music are doing a great job at communicating the artists to the fans, and the fans are doing a great job of kind of picking up the music that is good and kind of championing that. So I guess for you, in your perspective, what can we do to kind of bridge that gap? So what can me as like a consumer do to kind of I guess appreciate and find better music, or music that is more aligned to what I see as quality, and what can I guess the tastemakers do to kind of promote these artists better, if anything?
I do think in terms of like consumer habits, one thing I think is really cool. I'm not really on Apple Music, I'm also a Spotify babe. So for me, like when Spotify does recommended artists, so artists, so if you like someone, you scroll down to the bottom, it's like, oh, like
Yeah.
other artists you may like, kind of exploring that. Or like there's I think this feature where it's like so and so like radio, so you're listening to the artist and it kind of like will pull in songs from like other artists who may be similar. So like actually like engaging with what's being recommended to you is I think a good starting point. I think definitely going to more open mic nights or like music events, because I think a lot of those events are actually trying to platform the people that may be up and coming, and I think those are really great opportunities to see them at an intimate live setting, because trust me, when these artists blow up, you're never going to see them for that cheap of a price ever again. So like now that there's an actual opportunity to go and see and support these people, definitely go. And I think as consumers, when you see these kind of more underground shows, go to as many as you can, because the more you kind of put your footfall towards those kind of things, the bigger that they can become, and the more money these kind of platforms can generate in order to put on bigger shows and to like do more. So I think just, I guess, put your money where your mouth is my biggest, I guess, piece of advice from that perspective. From a tastemaker's perspective, I think look at how the market is changing and try and adapt your medium to however the market is changing. So if it means you've got to be on TikTok, I'm not telling you to go out there and dance, but get on TikTok. If you see that, your audience likes YouTube shorts, start posting up there, post stuff on YouTube. However you gotta change your medium to get in front of the audience that is going to engage with whatever content you're putting out there, then definitely be open to that. And I'm not saying like spread yourself thin and be everywhere all at once, but if you kind of know that, okay, my audience might be a bit more visual, even if you are starting as a written platform, maybe have your article, have it as a voiceover and have pictures and then put that in a video and you do it like that. It doesn't always have to be this like masterful production. And I think that's the problem that a lot of people have, and the biggest barrier. They think that I need to be doing like cinematic type visuals in order to engage people, where people just need the information. Like start wherever you are. Like honestly, I promise you, the money and the the really expensive equipment will come. Just start with what you have, and just get yourself in front of the audience that you're trying to in the mediums or in the places that you think they're going to be.
Well said. And with all the interviews you've done, and again, and all the years you've been doing this, again, you've been covering this for, I say, so from 2017 up to 2021, where you kind of moved to Spanish, maybe even more towards last year, even. Do you have like a favorite interview that you say, okay, you know what, this is the one? Like, I'm pretty sure you have a lot of great interviews, right? But there's one where you're like, okay, you know what, this one means a lot to me. Again, you've covered people like Ray, Craig David, Arlo Parks, again, before she came into superstar she is now. But is there any that kind of tugs your strings the most?
Oh, damn. I knew this question was coming, but every time somebody asks me this, I'm never any more prepared than the last time. God. Okay. There are so many I could pull from. Oh, God. Okay. I have a top three, I think.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so in no particular order. I think I'll start with Shaka.
Okay, cool.
That
So,
was a very, very special interview for me because from the point at which I started my career to when that interview had happened, he was always somebody I wanted to interview. Like I often said to my friends, like, listen, if I ever interview Shaka, I'll retire. Like that is just the pure and end all of my career. Like I I honestly think that man is a genius. Like the way that he hears music, creates music, sees music, it's just such a like all inclusive sense, like experience, like sensory experience. It's yeah, I've the way that he creates music, I've always found that quite powerful. So to have that conversation with him, I think for me was definitely one of the highlights of my career. And I think it was particularly special because I genuinely believe that he enjoyed that interview as much as I did. And I felt like that made it all the more special. Like, like sometimes people are like, oh, don't meet your heroes, like you'll hate it, whatever. It was
yeah.
like really fulfilling that we had that conversation. And he's someone that I wanted to speak to for such a long time. And it was actually a good conversation, like on both ends. So that's the one. I think Craig David has definitely got to be up there. Like, I never in a million years imagined that I was gonna get the tap on the shoulder to like interview like Craig David. I didn't see it coming. And like what like when that interview happened, like a lot of things were going on like in my own personal life that were just such a chaotic thing. And I didn't realize how much I needed that in my life at the time. So I just think it just came at a like a really I needed that moment. Like I didn't realize it at the time, but I genuinely I needed that interview. So I think it was just beautiful the way that life aligned for that to happen. And again, like he even tweeted that he really enjoyed the
Yeah, you
interview. So
think he
I
said
was
like thank you or
again,
something like that. Yeah.
yeah. So I was really taken aback about that. Like I can walk around and like say like confidently say Craig David knows who I am. Like, like
Yeah.
it's just one of those things. Like it's like this is somebody I listened to in my childhood. So like I never in a million years imagined that that was gonna happen. So that was a real like pinch me moment. And I think final one was LMA
And this
because
was
I
for
think
NME,
like
right? I think he covers it for NME or
yeah
something
yeah
like
yeah
that.
yeah
Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And because obviously I'm a massive R&B babe, like everyone knows that I've been screaming about R&B, particularly UK R&B since the beginning of time. So her being, I guess, the UK R&B golden child, like our like one of our biggest success stories, being able to do that and have such a genuine conversation with her, do it like on camera as well, was incredibly special, especially because I think we've spoken about this, but I've said I've never really been an on-camera person. So I think to be at a point where I felt confident and comfortable enough to do that on camera and to be able to have that like conversation with her in particular, I think was very, very special for sure. So yeah, those are the three. There are definitely more, but it was
Yeah,
awesome.
I think especially with these things, it could change on the day. It could change on the weather. You know what I mean? Like, because again, when you have so many to talk, they have their own reasons. But it makes sense that the top three are the R&B. Again, I think when look like IndustryMe, that was
Yeah, that was
mainly the
always going
thing.
to happen.
Yeah, you know what I mean, it was always gonna happen. It was always gonna go that way. And again, I think I've kind of teased and hinted it in so many different ways. Do you ever feel like you get your flowers for what you do? Because again, I feel like I've kind of been aware and kept tabs on. And again, not it's not a crazy question, but like in terms of like I've kept tabs on a lot of people who have covered content throughout the years in the UK, and people have their own kind of how do I word this? Motivations, right? It could be again, I want to interview my favorite artists, or I feel like I can add something to the scene. But it's very rare you get people who go through like several years of consistency, and even if they're not getting a look, and they're still kind of tugging away, doing their work, kind of growing their work, and kind of keeping it going, right? I don't think there's many, in my opinion, I don't think there's many people like you. But what does Ray say? Does she agree with that? Like, how does she feel about her kind of interviewing and kind of journalism for it?
Oh, I would definitely agree when I genuinely feel like I'm one of one, and I mean that in the least like conceited way possible. I don't really think there are many people like me. I think in a very unique way. I think I have a particular gift for perception, so I often see things many years before they take place. So I do think I'm very unique in that regard. Do I think I get my flowers? That's a very controversial one because in some ways yes, and in some ways no. I think professionally, like so with like people within the industry, I think for the people that do know me and the people I do come across, it's always been quite positive, quite a positive thing. But I don't think like I am like everyone's top of mind. So
Yeah.
if like someone says, "Oh, like name me a journalist from the UK scene," I don't always think my name is going to come up in that conversation. And I used to feel a way about that, not so much now. I think that was never what I was doing it for. So
Right.
like if it happens, it happens, but that's not why I did this. Like I was in the beginning, I was very much in the background anyway. So most people didn't even know that industry was my thing. IndustryMe was my thing. So like, in that regard, I'm not really too surprised. Um, do I find it hurtful, or does it like do I think it's like a negative thing? Not now. I did at one point. Because it's kind of like, especially when you're doing something for a long time, you're like, I know you people see me. Like, like it's like one of
Yeah,
those things where it's
yeah,
like
yeah.
after a certain point in time, like a lack of acknowledgement is an intentional thing, right? So
Mhm.
there was definitely an element in the kind of earlier days where I was kind of feeling a bit slighted. I genuinely don't feel like that now. I feel positively about the contributions that I made. Um, and ironically, it wasn't until I actually left like IndustryMe and I put the announcement out that I was leaving that I recognized the impact that I'd had, because people that I had not spoken to in years, like just like random people whose careers I've touched in probably the most minute of ways came out and said thank you, because I wouldn't have been here without you, or I wouldn't have continued going with my career without you, or I wouldn't like nobody was giving me a looking until you. Oh, I performed at your open mic and now I'm getting booked for shows. Like there was so much of that that I was like, okay, you know what? I don't need the flowers. Like the impact is clearly there. Like there are people whose lives have been changed in a positive way because of something I've done. So the flowers and the recognition would be nice, but don't need it.
Yeah, I think that's something that I think myself I had to kind of come to grips with. Again, going through my own kind of journey. I think when I had the podcast, I was kind of covering all these artists, and I really felt like we were doing good work, and really kind of giving people a good kind of spread of like hip hop and R&B and stuff like that. And what used to really frustrate me on my side was the amount of people that in like DMs and in real life would kind of come to me and really appreciate my work. But when it came to like actively sharing it with the world, there was a huge disconnect, right? But when it came to bigger figures, I'll say. When it came to big people that were a bit more had a bit more notoriety than what we had, they were very quick to kind of share that and be like, "Oh my gosh, this is great." It's like, wait, but like what you said in the DM is very different to what you're showing right now, or I know what your interests are, and this is very different. And I'm not saying you're lying, but it doesn't feel as genuine, I would say. Again, that's just a pure assumption. I think that used to really kind of get under my skin for a long time. And then I think similar to you, I think everyone kind of gets to that point where whether you kind of gain a lot of like popularity and success from it or not, I think you get to a point where it's like, well, I am doing this because I enjoy it, or the reason I keep doing this is because I enjoy it. It was never about some random number or random person on the internet I'm never going to meet. So yeah, I think that's a good lesson for people who are starting out. And again, because you never know how far these things are going to happen. Like when I started my podcast, and people were saying, "Oh yeah, my aunt used to listen to that." I'm like, "What? What? Like, what do you mean your aunt used to listen to that?" But you never know, right? You just never know. And again, especially about culture, people are quite conservative. You never know how they're kind of engaging with your content, right? You touched on it as you were saying that, and this is one of the things where, again, because I saw your announcement at the time, because I've been following your kind of account for a while, but one thing I didn't know at the time when you made this announcement that you owned IndustryMe. So this is quite an interesting phenomenon to kind of leave something started, right? What was the kind of, and again, you had this announcement, you said, like you're leaving with immediate effect. It's like, okay, cool. I don't know if you've kind of spoken about it like in detail on a platform. We kind of good as much as you can, right? In terms of, okay, something you created, why did you kind of step away from that? What was the reason behind that decision?
Oh, okay. So to be completely transparent, I think I'd fallen out of love with the industry. Never the music, but the industry. Like,
Yeah,
I think things had become like very political, and like I was like kind of looking at conversations around investment and like the business aspects of things, and it was just kind of like, this is not why I started. And if I continue on this path, I'm going to end up hating it completely. And I just think I didn't ever want to like let the stress become resentment.
right.
Like I felt like I'd invested so much time into this thing that it was better that I walked away a little bit irritated, but still with love for it, than like keep going and like ended up like resenting something that was such a beautiful thing and such a massive portion of my life. And I also think like as it was growing, there were certain things that needed to be changed, but I didn't personally feel comfortable with like the change that I think needed to happen. And I was like, I don't want to get to the point where I'm now a hindrance for the growth of this thing. So I'm like, you know what? I've got another editor that's here. I trust that he's going to do a great job. He's like full of energy, full of fire. Like he wants to, he has plans for growth. He has plans to see things progress. And he's clearly passionate about what he's doing here. I trust that he can take this forward. So I can bow out gracefully now, knowing that the platform's in safe hands. But I think that's another thing. Like, I think I'd been umming and ahhing about like stepping back for a while, but I didn't have a replacement. And I needed to feel like, because I didn't want it to end after me, is what I'm, I guess, trying to get at here. So, because I didn't want it to end, there needed to be somebody to, I guess, continue, like, take the baton on. And I didn't feel completely comfortable stepping away until that happened. So the moment I felt like, okay, this can happen, he can do this, then I was like, okay, I'm ready to let go. And I did.
I mean, again, I think it takes a lot. It takes a lot of absence of ego to do that. Because again, when people build something, especially um, with people in our community, right? It's like, well, I own this, right? It's all about ownership, and so I built this, and I'm never gonna let this go, right? But then you're like, okay, no, there's actually a world where this kind of can succeed and do better without me even being here. And I think yeah, that's kind of you don't see that very very often. And I think from with the way you were kind of like tweeting stuff like that, it does feel like the scene kind of jaded you in that sense. It feels like you still have a love for it, but I think in terms of like, yeah, being into it, so it's God,
Yeah.
touch on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely at the point that I'd left, I definitely felt like very jaded because I kind of felt like the industry became like, I guess we touched on this earlier, like a bit of a place that was only concerned about hype. And I also think there's a certain aesthetic that works really well within this industry, which I do not fit. And I was very aware that I did not fit this particular aesthetic. So I'm kind of like, are you willingly choosing to ignore us because I don't fit a particular aesthetic? If that's the case, that's very insane. But also, okay, fine. So let me not be the aesthetic that's at the forefront of the brand if that's the hindrance. I'll happily step aside and see if that makes a difference. And I definitely started to see an energy shift the moment I did that. And that hurt, but it was like, okay, I made the right decision. Like I guess that's all I can say on that.
No, I get it. I get it. Like I could kind of I think there's definitely that. I think I'll agree with you in that sentiment. There's always a particular look that people are kind of looking for, I guess from both sides, whether you're a consumer and kind of the people who are kind of funding these endeavors. So yeah, I understand that. But again, so it's not that you'd kind of be, walk quietly into the night. No, you move on to managing, which you were already doing before you left IndustryMe. But it's what's so interesting about the management you're doing. It's not particularly like based around music. Yes, Anne Marie is a DJ. She does that, do stuff like that. But it's not. It doesn't have to be that because again, the other person you manage, Jenny, she has nothing to do with music. So, what was your? It always felt like you had different desires to sing because yeah, one thing I always thought was an interesting tidbit again doing my research that you also covered interior design at IndustryMe as well. I was like, what the fuck? Like interior design? What the hell? So it does feel like you always had these range of interests. So yeah, why management? And again, why kind of management outside of music?
First of all, the fact that you know about the interior design is like that's absolutely sending me right now. That's so far back. That's crazy. Oh my God. Most people don't actually know that there was like a brief stint in that. And again, the festival that I actually covered when I was doing the interior design stuff was actually spotlighting people who were like new in the interior design space. So they had like either just won awards or they were like very like small independents who were at this exhibition. So it's kind of like everything was always connected. Like regardless of the art form, it was always about uplifting the independents, uplifting the people that may not get a looking that I think are doing really cool things that should, but who may not because they don't have a massive budget to spend on marketing or they don't have a massive like battery pack like powering them but behind whatever they're doing. They don't have a machine that's pushing their stuff. So yes, it feels very random, but it was definitely all interconnected. In regards to the management stuff, so again, that started very, very, very randomly. I had no idea that I was going to end up in talent management, but now that I'm here, it's kind of one of those things that makes perfect sense. So the girl that I first started managing, so Jenny, who you've mentioned, we actually went to school together. And we like kind of both went to the same high school and then like kind of parted ways to, do college and uni. And then after we both came back from uni, we both had the idea to do the She Creates event, which you mentioned. So that's kind of how Jenny and I ended up back in each other's lives in the first place. So we both put that event on, like, did really, really well. Had a lot of positive feedback from it. And then she kind of approached me one day and was like, I know you're a super organized person. How do you feel about managing me? Because I'm doing a lot of speaking right now and I don't know like kind of where I want to head next with it, but I know I'm meant to do something great with my life. I know I'm like meant to do this thing. How do you feel about management? And I kind of looked at her like, are you sure you want to do that? Like, are you absolutely certain? And she said, yeah, like I've worked with you on this event, so I know that we work well together. I know that you're super organized. Like, let's just see what happens. So I was like, okay, let's see what happens. And that was, I believe, 2019. So I've been managing ever since, basically.
And how would you say I guess the game is different in terms of, so when you're interviewing, trying to secure interviews, when you're a journalist, you're trying to secure interviews and opportunities, I guess, to kind of talk to artists and people in the industry. But now you're a manager, you're trying to secure maybe gigs, events, engagements. Would you say the challenge is different, or do you think there's a lot of parallels between the two?
There's definitely a lot of parallel. I think me knowing how to pitch in the first place, journalism played a huge role in me knowing how to pitch. Like, I know kind of how busy like a journalist's inbox may be or like an editor's inbox may be. So I kind of assume when I'm pitching for opportunities, those people's inboxes are equally as busy, right? So I think in terms of that element of things, also the kind of networking element of like going out and like meeting people, I think because I kind of honed that skill, yes, from corporate, but also from being in the industry, I kind of knew how to maneuver that. And I think because I'd always straddled both worlds, having clients that were in entertainment, but also clients that weren't, I think it definitely helped me like maneuver both spaces because I'd been in both spaces for my entire career. So I think, yeah, to answer your question, journalism definitely did help with management for sure.
Were there any challenges?
In terms of starting management,
Yeah.
I think the biggest challenge I had in the beginning was feeling a bit out of my depth because management was never an intentional, oh, I'm going to be a manager. And it was never like, oh, let me go and do this course or do this thing to make me prepared for this.
Right.
I just had to trust at that point that all of the skills and experiences I had prior to being there were good enough and were had rounded me enough as a businesswoman, because that's essentially what I became as a businesswoman to represent my clients and put my best foot and their best foot forward.
Right. And if again, if it what I find so kind of like endearing about what you do as a manager is like you kind of take their wins as your own. It's like, no, we did this as like a team. It's like when a coach wins like a championship, right? It's like, oh no, like we secured this event at Google, and oh my gosh, look, my clients won this awards and all that stuff. Do you feel that's more like, okay, you know what? It's kind of I remember being that person, kind of being there on the front line, getting all these things, kind of having these achievements, but now I'm able to kind of I guess kind of similar to what you're trying to do before, right? When you're trying to like write these blogs that help people, but now you're actually directly helping you be able to see the fruits of the labor. I guess it seems like you get a lot of I guess what's the word? Not reward, but yeah, rewards. You get a lot of rewards from doing stuff like that, like kind of like personal. Would you say that's the case?
Most definitely. I think I kind of touched on this before, but I think talent management is so obviously what I was always meant to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like the level of fulfillment I get from seeing people grow and seeing kind of like reflecting on the year and looking at like the goals that we've hit and us hitting goals and like seeing things that like seem so far off on like the 5 year plan, like hitting those kind of goals and like doing that and kind of seeing people's career growing from strength to strength has easily been one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. Like because I think management it's tough. Like there are a lot of extreme highs, but there are a lot of extreme lows that come with management, right? And it's like there's so much work that goes on behind the scenes. So when something positive does happen, I make a point of celebrating very loudly because I know all the work that went into doing that. So like primary example, so Jenny's TED Talk, that was such a highlight of her career. But that, in terms of the back end, took us about 2 years.
Jesus.
So there was like a lot of like back and forth, like, we would love to do this with you guys. And then like the person that we were trying to contact, like them being away for a while, and then there was like annual, there was just so much back and forth and like, oh, we're going to talk about this theme. I don't know if that theme really fits, and then we're changing the speech. So it's like, well, there was so much of that. So when that finally came together, it was such a beautiful moment for us. And I think it was also really, really cool because that talk that then got picked up by like the wider TED platform, and then it got boosted. And like that's not something that happens all the time,
Yeah,
right?
of course,
So
yeah.
then when all of those things were going on, it was kind of like, oh, this is why. It just kind of like put everything into perspective. It was like, oh, this is why it was so difficult, because this is the reward that was going to be on the other side of it. And it just made everything worth it. So yes, I'm always going to shout about the achievements of my clients because I know how hard they all work. They're very, very hard workers for sure.
Fair. So, guess looking forward, do we just expect more management from Ray, or does she have any other plans to do any other endeavors moving forward?
Ooh. Oh. I think, oh, I don't know. Like I think management is definitely going to have my attention for a long time. I think I do. want to like probably dabble in some coaching as well, because I think maybe everyone doesn't need me for the long term, but I think there's a lot of like consultancy and like, you know, short-term coaching that I think that would be of benefit to a lot of people. I do want to write some more. I think writing is a bug. Like it never really goes away. Like I think once you start with it, like you always pick it back up. I think once a writer, always a writer. So I think I'd love to write my own book. Like this is a very future goal now. So this is not something I plan to do right now, but I'd love to write my own book at some point. I think there's a part of me that wants to dabble back into poetry. I think that's a medium I've always loved. And I think, yes, I am a published poet, but it feels like that was so many moons ago. Like I'd love to do something more recent with that. So yeah, that's definitely something like that's kind of on the to-do list, the never-ending to-do list, for sure. So yeah, I think exploring the written form again is probably something that will happen in the kind of distant future.
Okay, cool. We look forward to seeing it. So coming towards the end of the interview, do you have any final words? Is anyone you'd like to thank or say hello to?
Oh wow. Do you know what I feel like? You know when you win an Oscar and like they're like, thank you, Jesus, thank you, Mom, thank you. Like that's honestly what
Yeah,
this is making me feel like right
yeah.
now. I think thank you to my clients for one. I think the amount of work that they put in and the way that they are such, I guess, relentless and resilient people, and you know, like how big they think as well. I honestly love it. Like I think being able to imagine is kind of like the base point of being able to achieve things. So I want to shout out them. I want to shout out everyone who ever supported like IndustryMe, Rhymeshe, just any projects I've ever been a part of, because I don't think people realize how much it means. But there are definitely points being in this industry where you're like, why am I even doing this? And having people that support definitely does keep you going. To all the PRs as well that took a chance on me and like actually brought me in and like, you know, had me interview their clients, because I think a lot of like where I got to in my career as a journalist was down to women, specifically Black women in PR, who got me into those rooms. I think even in like talent management, like PRs are definitely the backbone of a lot of the things I've had my hands in over the years. So shout out to all the PRs I've worked with. Um, Shout out to Tom, who's currently managing IndustryMe and doing an amazing job with it. Thank you for taking care of my baby. I could go on forever. I really could.
Hey, as long as you
Shout
want,
out to
as
my
long as you
siblings as
want.
well. Shout out to my siblings as well. Like I love them both very much. And they've always been in my corner and always been supporting everything that I'm doing. So shout out to you too.